This is both unbelievable and believable, as with most things related to Donald Trump. He has already done a U-turn on his global tariff policy. Let's get into it.
Well, Ian, I think there's no doubt tonight that in the face of the power of the international markets, as Liz Truss found, Donald Trump has caved. There are few, and there have been few, centres of political power which can match Trump in his own country, domestically speaking, politically. He has vanquished the Democratic Party. He's vanquished Congress, bent it to its will. And yet the courts, to some extent, still some centre of power against him, but not much. But in the face of the power of the markets, Donald Trump has caved. And he's done so because it was clear, in particular throughout the course of the day, forget just about the stock market reaction, which had been bad. Have a look, and we've been talking about it all day, at the reaction on the US securities, i.e. bond markets, the sell-off that has been taking place throughout the course of the day. The place, US securities, US bonds, US government borrowing, the place, the dollar, which is supposed to be the safe haven of investment when global economic times are tough. What have you seen today? A sell-off in US securities and US bonds throughout the course of the day. And I think it is that which has prompted Trump, which has made Trump, which has forced Trump to accept that he could not go on with the plan as had been previously constructed. So Trump has caved. That said, of course, he has not caved in one particular area, which is this kind of contest that is taking place, a sort of tug of war, a geopolitical and economic tug of war, which is taking place between the United States and China. We obviously saw earlier in the day China responding to US tariffs with even greater tariffs, US responding again this evening. That, of course, still matters because no matter what Trump does with the rest of the world in terms of the economy, of course, and tariffs on the rest of the world, the US and China together are 47% of global GDP, and they are deeply interwoven and intertwined with each other. So tariffs going up to 125%, which presumably Beijing will respond to again, will matter and will continue to matter. But I think in terms of the overall picture now, in terms of facing down the US capital, facing down international global bond markets, facing down the international markets overall, there was only one winner. Trump has caved.
And of course, America has a huge amount of debt placed in China, doesn't it? And a lot of that debt is due for repayment fairly soon. So I mean, this is quite a dangerous game that Trump is playing, because if China demanded the immediate repayment of its debt on time rather than reschedule, as often happens in these matters, I mean, that could be catastrophic.
China is the second largest holder of US sovereign debt, second only to Japan. It holds $700 billion worth of US sovereign debt. And this was always, look, I think if you look across, and we're not even 3 months into the Trump presidency, which seems extraordinary, the second Trump presidency. I think the one theme that you can really see, I think, is Trump not fully understanding the limitations of US power. The United States is the most powerful country in the world. It's the biggest economy in the world. It's the biggest military spender in the world, biggest political power in the world, no doubt. But it cannot operate without some limitations on its power. And I think if you look in the two arenas, geopolitical power and economic power, you see the same story. In geopolitics, Trump seems to think that he can act without regard or much regard to the alliances that the United States have built up over 8 decades since the end of the Second World War. That is already having a cost right now because US allies believing that the US is not as a reliable a friend as it once was.
And that's a key point. Trump has a level of arrogance and narcissism to assume that America should be number one at all costs, and he's willing to go to any measure to win a trade war against China. But as you've just heard, China have a lot of potential leverage against the US, so it leaves things in a very delicate state.
And you can see the same thing with the economic story. Trump seemed to believe that he could apply all of these tariffs, and no matter what happened in terms of the other countries applying reciprocal tariffs back, it wouldn't affect the United States terribly badly. We've seen in the space of only a week, it was only last Wednesday, a week to the day, that Trump applied these tariffs. And in the space of a week, it has already unwound because he has seen the power of how interconnected the US economy is with the rest of the world. And indeed, the bond markets are in the United States. This is in many ways a Liz Truss moment for Donald Trump. The good thing is he's had the wisdom to actually see and unwind it before it got any worse.
Wisdom is probably being too kind to Trump. A lot of billionaires began turning their back on Trump since he applied the tariff policy. And this might have been the moment something in his pea-sized brain noticed something wasn't quite right.
What about the EU here? Because I was listening this morning and hearing that the EU was announcing it was going to impose retaliatory tariffs, and yet we understand that the EU tariffs are going to also be reduced to 10% in this 90-day period. How can that be?
Well, Ian, look, I think the thing is no one on the other side of the ledger wanted to see these tariffs enacted, right? So this was always just going to be a reciprocation in one form or another. So it's not that surprising, I suppose, that the EU have decided or will decide not to apply it in that way. But look, I mean, I think the thing is that this sort of shows everyone has been thinking in this last week, right? Just the same way with geopolitics in Ukraine. It's like, what's Trump's master plan here? What's the end game? This should remind us that Donald Trump, who undoubtedly is a really skilled political figure in a lot of ways. Not everyone listening to this might like that, but there's no doubt in terms of communications and the way that he connects with a big proportion of the American electorate. He's a very politically cunning figure in many, many regards. What he is not is a man with a master plan. And I think that this reminds us, if this were a master plan, it would have been something that Trump would have been willing to prosecute come what may. If your job, if your aim, if your objective is to reindustrialize the American industrial base in places like the Midwest, in Ohio, and all of these sorts of places, then you would have stuck with tariffs come what may. That has not happened because Trump ultimately is not about the sort of long end game of political objectives. He's a man who specializes in tactics rather than strategy, and this is completely blown up in his face.